Welcome to Chaotic Insights, where today I break down the TV show Chaotic, and sometimes the TV show isn't the only thing that's chaotic. Today we'll be talking about episode 29, so grab a snack, start your laundry, and we'll dive right in. And episode 29 is called Chaotic Crisis. So, episode summary: in the real world, it's the annual science fair for Tom and Kaz at their high school, and everyone made a volcano except for Kaz. Kaz built a large-scale replica of what he hypothesizes is inside a scanner. Back at his house, Kaz is playing Chaotic Online when he starts to fall asleep. Then he gets a call from Tom that creatures invaded Chaotic. After the theme song, Kaz ports to Chaotic and a ton of creatures are battling at Chaotic. As Kaz searches for Tom, he finds Peyton, who is confused and concussed, and he tells Kaz that the Underworlders showed up first, then the Overworlders, then the Danians and Mopedians. Kaz then discovers Tom is fighting with the Overworlders and Sarah is fighting with the Danians. Kaor then tells us that Olmar built a tri-dimensional wormhole machine to get to Chaotic, but something went wrong. The wormholes appeared all over Chaotic. Kaor then reveals he wants Kaz to help as an advisor as he tries to conquer Earth. Kaz returns to Earth to the news that Danians are invading Paris. Tom then traps Kaz in a closet because he thinks Kaz built the science fair project to help Kaor invade Earth. Maxwell and Kaor fight on Earth, then Peyton wormholes in and they head for the school where it is revealed that the science teacher is the traitor to humanity, and he gave Kaz's science fair project technology to the Underworlders because Peyton recognized the teacher from a chaotic match. And that's how they figured out that he was the traitor. Kaz then uses his science fair project to send all the chaotic creatures back to Param. Kaz wakes up, it happens again, he wakes up, he gets asked out, and then he jokes, is he still dreaming? That's the episode. So, analysis. This is a Kaz episode through and through, because everything is from Kaz's perspective. And through Kaz's perspective, we learn about this girl that's in his science fair with him, and this is the few instances of like romance or flirtation we get in Chaotic, and so I think it's notable for that reason, but also because this girl hitting on Kaz becomes a shorthand for recognizing the dream state. So this girl is introduced at the science fair and she makes fun of Kaz or makes this snide remark or something at his project. And we know that she is a real person in this class because everything up until he falls asleep is the real world. So we know that she is a real person in the real world, but we don't know if she is a chaotic player. And it honestly would make sense if she wasn't a chaotic player because of the snide remark she made on Kaz's project. Now, in the first dream, she admits she always had a crush on Kaz, and in the second dream, she plays the damsel in distress, save me, Kaz, and then it's left ambiguous whether the third aspect is a dream or not, where she asks him out via scanner call, but because we've established the shorthand of, the first time when he asks her out, that's a dream. The second time when she plays the damsel, that's a dream. So it goes to repetition that this third time would also be a dream, but it is left ambiguous. However, because she calls him on a scanner, right, we know she's a real person in the real world. We don't know if she's a real person in chaotic. We don't know if she's a chaotic player. And you would think that if she was a chaotic player, then Kaz and Tom would know that she is a chaotic player because they're in the same class together, right? They would have at least some acknowledgement there, but there is no acknowledgement there. So you can argue that this third reality is also a dream because we get the shorthand of her asking Kaz out, and she uses a scanner, which is chaotic technology, to ask him out, which we are unsure if that's reality or not. It's left ambiguous. Now, this episode is clearly a play on the everything was a dream trope, and I say that it's a play on the trope because although it executes the trope, it does it multiple times in a way that exaggerates for levity. It kind of is a parody of the trope because it does it so many times, right? When you do it, if you do it once, that's just using the trope. Doing it twice, that's kind of poking fun at it. And then having that ambiguous third time where it's like, oh, this is a dream again, then we're really in the territory of, right, this is making fun of the trope. This is, well, it's executing it in earnest, but then flipping it on its head to some extent, where, right, the audience, like the second time you're like, oh no, it's happening again, twist, but the third time you're like, this is a pattern. And it's a play on the trope. They're playing with the trope. So I think that's funny. I think that's fun. And I love that Chaotic gets to do that. Additionally, this episode is clearly a break from form for Chaotic. There's no chaotic battle, there's no param. This story fully takes place in the real world and in Kaz's head. This is a dreamscape, this is imagination, this is subconscious, this is the dream. And then we get that first initial section at the science fair that's the real world. And, I'm not partial to the real world aspects of the story, but like normally our formula is param chaotic battle. A plot, B plot, that's what we're doing. Not what we're doing here. There's really no B plot here. This is Kaz's dream, you know, and that's like the full thing. We have real world, we have Kaz's dream, and that's the show, that's the plot. And so clearly a break from form. We're playing with the expectations of what a chaotic episode can be. Now moving on to lore. There's no lore this episode. Why? Because everything is a dream, except for what we learn about in the real world. So we do get insight on the real world of like in the science fair they have a teacher. These are some people in class, you know, things like that. But kind of irrelevant. Now we do get insight on Kaz's psyche. We get insight on how he perceives the world because everything we see is being filtered through Kaz's mind. So everything in this episode is something to learn about Kaz, right? His subconscious has a theory on how scanners work, right? Now, in the real world, did he build scanner technology? Yes. And honestly, that's impressive. Kaz built a computer for the science fair. You know, whether it's real scanner technology or not, he built a computer and that's impressive. But his subconscious thinks that the way scanners work isn't through technology, but it's through wormhole technology. And that implies that he feels like he's really at chaotic when he's at chaotic. He feels like he's really at param when he's in param, right? He feels like it's not just his mind that's there, it's his body as well. And that this wormhole technology takes his whole self and puts it in that environment. Like, it's not just his consciousness, but his body is there as well. That's how he perceives his experience, is being there. Which, okay, fun, okay, cool. We get insight onto Kaz's experience, but we also get a new visual language on how this is described as well. We get these wormholes, which are not how we see anything happen ever in the real param, right? So we can rule out that the chaotic technology uses wormholes because this visual language is never used. Whereas in the stream, the visual language of wormholes is used. And it's it's depicting these wormholes for porting, for transportation. Like that's normally depicted through code, and that's the visual language we normally get. But now we get these giant swirling red orangey spirals that are transporting people. So we get the insight that this is how Kaz perceives it, and also that because we don't get this visual language in a normal chaotic episode, that's not how it works. And it also demonstrates that Kaz has a fundamental misunderstanding on the technology that's being used at Chaotic. Like, sure, he uses it all the time, but the way he perceives it is not how it happens. Additionally, We get that this episode demonstrates how Kaz has greater allegiance to humanity than the underworld, but has a greater allegiance to chaotic existing than not existing. Right at the end there, Kaz like sacrifices himself. He doesn't sacrifice himself, but he like jumps in front of the beam and like injures himself in order to save Kaor. He has that dedication that Kaor is something that is important to him and should exist, but he doesn't think that it should exist more than he thinks humanity should exist. Right? His priorities are, I'm a human, then I'm a chaotic player. So that's interesting that we get to see that priority happen and him sort that out in this episode through his dreams. And this dream, like if you like analyze it as his psyche, if you analyze it as a dream, this is really an anxious dream. He's feeling anxious about being stuck in the middle, right? In the dream, he's stuck between Kaor and he's stuck between humanity. He's stuck in the middle. He's anxious about Tom's loyalty and Sarah's loyalty as friends. They both prioritize their respective tribe over friendship with him. On the flip side, the dream shows us that he is secure in his relationship with Kaor, right? Kaor chooses him, needs him, and he's secure in his relationship with Peyton. Peyton gives him information. Even though he's concussed and confused, he is giving Kaz valuable information and solves the mystery. And then finally, this dream tells us that maybe he's open to love, but it tells us that he's definitely attracted to women. Kaz is a straight man, or, maybe he's bi. But we know that he has an attraction to women, and that is part of who he is, and specifically this woman in particular. Now, this is also something we learned that is not confirmed because it was in the dream, but the dream implies that scanner lore has a port for an aux cord. It has an aux cord outlet, if you will. And so I would say that is notable for scanner lore, but, is not confirmed. Maybe they just have an aux cord in the dream. Maybe scanners have an aux port. So those are the things we learn. We learn about Kaz's subconscious, about how he thinks chaotic works, wormholes, and that he's wrong. We learn that he is really struggling with this concept of being stuck in the middle of, there's people over there, there's people over there. He wants to people please, he wants to please everybody, but ultimately he has to decide on his priorities and his insecurities about relationships and about his place in the world. And then we learn about the scanner lore. Maybe we have an export. So on to fun facts and other notes. Something I wanted to note here is when we get to chaotic, we have this shaky camera effect that mimics a handheld camera. Like if you were in the action holding a camera, it's a little bit wobbly, right? There's no tripod, there's no gimbal, right? We're in the action. We have sound effects off screen of big booms, and those shake the camera. And it really comes into play after the theme song, like at that battle of chaotic. But if you pay attention, you notice that the camera is not static. It's shaky, it rumbles with the background and the sound effects, and it heightens the visual chaos that ensues in this setting. And it helps you feel like you are in the action because the world is affecting your view, right? These sound effects affect what you see. And so this shaky handheld moment, it adds to the visual chaos and to the confusion that's happening on screen, but it really puts you in the action. It puts you in a position where you're there and you're perceiving the world in a way that you would if you were really there. Now, the camera has a lot of movement in this section of the show. It switches from the objective viewer to Kaz's POV to like an over the shoulder, we're following Kaz documentary style situation, and like Kaz dodges in and out of frame, and it really keeps the momentum going in this action sequence. And I think it really emphasizes the chaos, it emphasizes the danger. It emphasizes that in this battle of chaotic, it's chaotic and dangerous. And what else? Those are the things that it is. And I'll also mention that another thing they do to add to the chaos of the battle is they incorporate all three foreground, midground, and background in terms of composition and in terms of movement, right? Kaz is normally in our midground and he's running in and out of frame, he's ducking, he's weaving, he's in the action. But we get silhouettes of creatures in front of the camera, in between Kaz and the camera, right? Incorporating that foreground. And then we get the background. We get people swooping in, we get the blasts, we get debris. And that's how they incorporate all three. So we have chaos happening in all three: foreground, midground, background, and with the camera, you're really immersed in what's going on. Now, another note, we do get another Song of Fury in this episode, and so they really want you to know what this music does. You know, they used it in this episode, they used it in the last episode, you know, they're really emphasizing. Now, what does this Song of Fury do? It levels you up. Now, something that I think is funny about this episode is we get to see real world objects animated in the chaotic style. And not just objects, but like technology. We get cars, we get planes, we get tanks, we get missiles. And I think that's really funny because we're so used to seeing this fantastical stylized technology like act as if it's normal in like the Param setting. But there's such a juxtaposition between seeing like a car and seeing a vile driver, right? And I think it's really funny to see them interpret like a car in the chaotic style. I just think it's interesting and I think it's fun to point out, you know? Moving on to final thoughts. Now, the first time I rewatched this episode as an adult, like when they first put it on YouTube, I saw this episode and I was like, huh, that's it? Like, that's the whole episode? And that's because I have vivid memories of dreams, of my imagination, of playing. Like, I definitely latched onto this episode and it seeped into my dreams. And, like, I basically, like, as I used to fall asleep, I would think about this episode, and then my dreams would, like, be a continuation of the episode and elaborated on the story. And so, honestly, this dream sequence in Chaotic is really similar to a recurring dream that I used to have in my childhood, but that's not neither here nor there. But like, you know, I saw Sarah in France and I was like, okay, iconic, but I was like, and France is all we see. Like that's the only region of the world we're getting. There's no Great Wall of China, there's no I don't know, you know, like what? France is the only place we're getting. And I swear this episode used to be so long, but I was like, why are we seeing so much of the substitute teacher in the beginning? Like, you know, we get so much of this real world in the beginning. And one, we don't see that much of him, and two, he's not even a substitute teacher. He's just like the science teacher. And so, like, it goes to show how I misremember the episode. And ultimately, when I rewatched the episode and I was kind of like, oh, that's it, you know, I have this memory of I watched it and I knew the episode beginning would be a little annoying. Like when they're at the science fair, I'm like, I think that science teacher is a little annoying. I think there's a little bit of secondhand embarrassment when Kaz reveals his science fair project, and then we get into the dream, and it's like, oh heck yeah, this is awesome. But from my perspective, I'm like, oh, oh, that's it, you know. And what I elaborated on in my mind, or like what I remember, and like now as I see what the reality is, those memories start to fade. But I just think it's interesting because why would I latch onto the dream episode in my dreams? Crazy. But now rewatching it again this time, when I see it and I'm like, you know, the beginning, it's fine. Like I knew what I was in for in the beginning. I knew I don't really love the science fair, but it was shorter than I remember. And since I knew what I was getting in for, I was prepared for it. And it was just before the theme song. So honestly, I thought it was going to be like 10 minutes and it was just before the theme song. And then we got to Chaotic and I was like, actually, this is really good. Like the action here, the foreground, the midground, the background, the shaky camera, the dodging and weaving. We get so many cameos. Every creature that you could imagine is in this episode. except for the Mopedians. Am I wrong? I watched this episode a couple weeks ago when I did these notes. Do we see any Mopedians? I'll have to rewatch. But it's like every single creature you could even imagine is in this episode, throwing attacks in the background, in the foreground. Like Vidav is there. I don't even know. And we get this kind of like nonstop action scene that's really intense and it kind of goes crazy and it goes on for so long. This episode is so action focused. And we get like this battle of Chaotic, and then we get in the real world the Maxor versus Kaor. And Maxor versus Kaor, it goes crazy as well. It's like the Maze of Lysic or whatever that was when we had that battle there. It's like that, but again. And then, you know, we see the battle and then it switches to Kaz POV and they're like in the background, like jumping and flipping out of frame. It's wild. And I did see a comment. I don't usually go looking for the comments in the YouTube videos when I watch them, but I, I, I scrolled a little. Now, I don't remember what comment it is, and I'm not going to go look it up, but somebody said that Kaor wins this chaotic battle between Maxor and Kaor, and it's the only time he wins between the two of them. Which I don't know if that's true, but Maxor won the battle in the maze, and Kaor wins this battle, but it's in Kaz's psyche, you know? So of course Kaor is going to win because he likes Kaor and thinks Kaor is more powerful. But the attacks they're doing here, crazy, engaging, wonderful. They hit that fire hydrant, love. Now, the episode itself, I like that they play with the dream trope. I think that's unique and interesting. The action, obviously, great. Um, and even though this is like a fun episode, it doesn't really contribute to the narrative at large. So, like, it's an easy one to skip, but it's memorable. And I love this episode for the personal reasons of like, it seeped into my dreams. And so, like, I've engaged with it and warped it in my own memory, but it's memorable. It's memorable because it's wacky. You know, that like psychological trick where you know, you remember things locationally and you remember things that are odd, that are weird, that are out of place. If something was normal, why would you remember it? But this episode is weird. It is weird and wacky and strange, and that's why you remember it. You know? Honestly, iconic. This is an iconic episode for Chaotic. And I'll say that, and I'll say it again. You know? It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, that's what I feel about it. I love this episode, and, you know, even though it doesn't connect to the greater psyche, and, you know, we learn a little bit about the real life, we get a bunch of new background characters, but the heart of this episode, the action, the excitement, the fantastical elements, the dream-like nature, I don't know, there's just something about it. And so, those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, and thank you for watching and good night. Goodbye. Thank you. See you later.